Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be talking about something called spiritual communicability. And I know that might sound a little intimidating, but really just think of it as how the living and how the living and the dead might interact. We've got some pretty amazing sources for this one. We've got historical accounts, religious perspectives, and even some modern day stuff. You ready to get a little spooky with me?
Oh, absolutely. I think this topic is so fascinating because it's something that people have been thinking about for centuries,
Come on.
really.
That's so true. And our sources point out that even ancient civilizations were already trying to,
Yeah.
like really trying to communicate with spirits.
Yeah, like the Egyptians,
Yeah.
the Greeks, the Romans, they all had these practices like necromancy or consulting oracles. Just imagine those were their ways of trying to tap into the spiritual realm.
I love that. Tapping into the spiritual realm. So what were they hoping to get out of it? I mean, why even bother?
You know, a lot of the same things that people are looking for today. Guidance, problem solving, maybe a sneak peek into the future, right? One of our sources talks about the story of Tobias from the book of Tobias. He meets this young man, but it turns out to be the spirit Azarias in disguise. So these stories weren't just about spooky encounters. They were like woven into their beliefs.
It makes you think, is there something in us? Like something that just wants to connect with something bigger than ourselves, something beyond our world. So how do we go from these ancient practices to developing major religions?
That's where it gets really interesting because you can almost think of these ancient practices as like the seeds of organized religion, prophets receiving messages from divine beings. That became like a central thing in a lot of different faiths. And that led to the idea of a sacred intermediary, someone between humanity and the divine.
Yeah, like Moses and the burning bush. That's a classic. And of course, we can't forget Jesus, who brought a whole new understanding of the divine through his teachings.
Exactly. But what if we fast forward a bit to the mid 1800s? This is when interest in spiritual communication just exploded.
This is when modern spiritualism really takes off, right?
Sure.
Seances were all the rage. Everyone wanted to talk to ghosts.
It really was like a spiritual gold rush almost. And one of the
Yeah.
most famous stories from that time is about the Fox sisters and something called the Hydesville rappings. So these were these mysterious knocking sounds, and they just sparked this huge wave of interest in communicating with spirits, and it led to like the massive popularity of seances.
Wow. It's crazy how a few knocks in a dark room could start a whole movement.
Mm.
So how does Spiritism fit into all of this,
Mm.
with all this spiritual energy flying around?
So right in the middle of all of that, you have this guy, Allan Kardec. He was a French educator, and he wanted to like organize the concept of spiritual communication, make it into a system, and that's what led to the foundation of Spiritism.
So he was like the architect, bringing order to all of this spiritual chaos.
You could say that. Kardec saw modern spiritualism as the fulfillment of Christ's promise, of a comforter, or a spirit of truth. He thought it was bringing a deeper understanding of God's laws and the spiritual world.
So we've gone from ancient rituals to
Mhm.
organized religion to a spiritual explosion and the birth of Spiritism. It's a wild ride. So what does Spiritism actually say about the right way to approach this spiritual communication?
Well, Spiritism actually sees communication with spirits as a natural thing. It's not supernatural to them, it's just natural. But they are really clear about the need to be responsible, to think about the common good. They even have some specific criteria for ethical spiritual communication.
I'm all ear. Tell me more about these guidelines.
Okay, so one of the big ones is just usefulness. So that means using spiritual communication for things like getting instruction, expressing solidarity, promoting personal growth, not just for, idle curiosity or personal gain.
So no getting winning lottery numbers from your great Aunt Mildred on the other side.
Not really, no. It's more about using this connection for deeper understanding and positive change.
That makes a lot of sense. Our sources also say that Spiritism is really against mediums profiting from their abilities.
Oh yeah, Kardec was adamant about that. He believed that if you turn these abilities into a service you can pay for, it would completely miss the point. He saw it as this sacred gift, not a way to make money.
Yeah, I see how that would be a conflict of interest. If money's involved, how can you be sure the messages are real? How do you know they're not just saying what people want to hear?
Exactly. It makes you question the motivation and the authenticity of the whole thing.
So Spiritism has this ethical framework. But does it tell us anything about how this communication actually happens? Do we get a how-to guide to the spirit world?
In a way, it does. Spiritism kind of lays out a framework for how it all works, the mechanics of spiritual communication, and it talks about different methods and how mediums play a special role.
So it's not like just lighting some candles and crossing your fingers. There's a system to it.
Yeah, think of it like a spiritual phone line, right? Like mediums are the operators, making sure the right calls go through. Our sources talk about things like tapping or knocking, for simple messages, or the spoken word, either directly from a spirit or through a medium.
Yeah.
And even writing, like the spirit writing directly, or using the medium's hand.
It's amazing to think about all the different ways it could happen. But what about the messages themselves? Are they all like big pronouncements from the beyond? Or is there some spiritual small talk going on too?
That's a good question. Kardec actually had a way of categorizing these messages. Not all communication is equal, let's say.
Okay, let's hear it. What kind of messages are we talking about?
All right, well, let's start with the not-so-great ones, what Kardec called crude communications. These are messages that are vulgar, maybe even offensive. And it often reflects on the spirit, like they're not very developed.
So like spiritual spam.
Yeah, exactly. Then there are frivolous communications. These are lighthearted, playful, but there's not really much substance to them, like the spirit world version of talking about the weather.
Huh, interesting. So some spirits need to work on their conversation skills. What about the more serious stuff?
Well, then you get to serious communications. These messages deal with important topics, but they might not always be totally accurate. It's like getting advice from a friend who means well, but they don't have all the facts. And then finally, there are instructive communications.
Okay, those sound like the ones I want to hear about. What's so special about them?
So instructive communications are all about teaching, about science, morality, philosophy, the deep stuff. And the idea is that the more advanced a spirit is, the deeper their message can be. Imagine learning from someone who's not limited by our world anymore.
That's mind-blowing. But we've been talking a lot about Spiritism specifically. Are there other ways people try to communicate with spirits? In other cultures? I mean...
Oh, for sure. Spiritism is just one perspective. This is something you see across cultures throughout history. Our sources mention Afro-Brazilian traditions, for example. They use rituals and offerings as part of their communication.
Right, so it's not just some fringe belief. It's woven into so many different cultures.
Exactly. And remember those professional mediums we talked about, the ones in the US and England, for example. Some people believe they can help connect people with loved ones, or even help with criminal investigations.
Wow, that's taking things to a whole other level, solving crimes with spirit communication. That's incredible. We've covered a lot of ground here, the history, the practices, the ethics. But I want to step back for a second. If this is real, if spiritual communication is actually happening, what does that mean for how we understand reality?
That's the big question, isn't it? If we accept that we can talk to spirits, it challenges everything we think we know about consciousness, about what happens after death, about how everything is connected.
It's like we're peeking through a crack in the door into a whole other dimension.
Exactly, and it makes us question if our current science can even explain this. Or do we need a whole new understanding of reality?
It's like we're trying to understand the ocean by looking at one tiny drop of water.
I like that. That's a great analogy. It really highlights how important it is to be open-minded, to consider things that might be outside our current understanding.
So it's not about rejecting science,
Huh?
but expanding it.
Exactly. And who knows what we might discover if we're willing to explore those new possibilities.
Speaking of exploring, our sources mention that spiritual communication isn't just about personal growth or talking to loved ones. Some people think we could use it for criminal investigations.
Yeah, it's true. In some places, law enforcement has actually consulted with mediums to help solve crimes. It's controversial, for sure. But it brings up some really interesting questions.
It's like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
Imagine having a psychic detective on your team.
It definitely pushes the boundaries, and it also raises ethical issues. Is it okay to get information from spirits like that? What about the potential for manipulation?
Yeah, that's a slippery slope. We need to be careful about how we use this stuff.
Absolutely. It's a conversation we need to have, especially as these practices become more common.
It feels like we're on the edge of something brand new, where the line between what we can see and what we can't is getting blurrier and blurrier.
And how we navigate that is going to be crucial.
A big responsibility.
One of our sources quotes Allan Kardec, and he talks about how important it is to use spiritual communication to make humanity better. He says, the spirits are there to help us, to enlighten us, and to guide us on the path of progress.
That's powerful. It's like we're not just doing this for ourselves, we're contributing to something much bigger.
Right. It's about humility, respect, and using these gifts for good.
It's like we've been given this incredible tool,
Hmm.
and we have to use it wisely.
Well said. So as we head into the last part of our deep dive, let's keep that in mind. We've looked at the history, the different practices, the risks, even the philosophical questions.
It's been an amazing journey so far.
And before we wrap it up, I want to go back to that term we talked about at the beginning, spiritual communicability. It sounds technical, but it really captures what this is all about.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It really gets to the heart of it.
It really does. Spiritual communicability. It suggests this connection isn't just about words, it's not just messages. It's like a bridge between different realms, a way to move past our physical limits.
And it reminds us that we're part of this bigger thing, a web of existence. That includes not just the living, but the ones who pass on too.
That's a powerful thought, to think we're surrounded by this unseen world.
It is.
It's like we're all tuned in to different frequencies. Some of us are more aware of it than others, but the connection is always there, the potential.
Do you think that maybe as we evolve as a species, we'll get better at navigating those frequencies, communicating more clearly with the other side?
That's an interesting thought. Imagine a world where spiritual communication is normal, like sending a text message.
Wow.
It would change everything, how we see life, death, everything.
It would be a complete paradigm shift. We'd have access to so much knowledge, so much experience. But it makes you wonder, could we even handle that kind of change?
Oh, absolutely. It would challenge our ethics, our understanding of right and wrong. We'd need safeguards to make sure nobody's taking advantage. We'd need to be really careful about how we use this new ability.
It would be a whole new world.
Full of possibilities.
But also dangers.
But I have a feeling it would be an amazing time to be alive. A real awakening.
Yeah, it would be pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And even though we're not there yet, the journey is pretty amazing in itself, right?
It really is. And as we keep exploring, it's important to remember what we've talked about today. Approach spiritual communication with respect, with an open heart. And be careful. Remember what Kardec said. The spirits are there to help us, to enlighten us, and to guide us on the path of progress.
That's a great reminder. This isn't just about us. It's about helping each other and contributing to something bigger than ourselves. So as we wrap up our deep dive into spiritual communicability, we want to leave you with this. Be open-minded, trust your gut, and explore those incredible realms of consciousness that are waiting for you. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride.